Okay, the issue here is around sexual health and teenage pregnancy, and sexual health is generally considered to be poor, and there is high levels of teenage pregnancy. Just to go through some of the statistics, which you're probably well aware of, in 2011, of the total 25,273 births, just over 1,100 of them were to teenage mothers under 20 years of age. However, and this is the good thing, it was the lowest number of teenage births in 35 years, so it reflects a continuing downward trend. The Department of Health has a 2013 target to reduce the number of unplanned births to young teenage mothers, and that is those who are under 17 years of age, by 25%. And that's one of the key objectives of the Department's Sexual Health Promotion Strategy and their Action Plan 2008-2013. The overall trend for teenage births is downwards, and the overall teenage birth rate has reduced over the period 2001 to 2010 from 16.9 births to 15 births per 1,000 females. But in the most deprived areas, the rate remains almost twice as high, and it is one of the largest health inequalities, the gaps that is in existence. And again, as a committee, we're actually doing stuff on health inequalities across the north. Figures from the Health and Social Care Board, their inequalities monitoring system, shows a 341% difference in the number of teenage births between the most and the least deprived areas. Teenage pregnancy and early motherhood, we're all aware, can have a negative consequence for both mother and baby. Statistically, babies born to teenage mothers are more likely to have low birth rate, be born prematurely, and have a greater risk of dying in infancy. Again, statistics have shown that as the babies grow up, there's a possibility that they're generally more susceptible to educational failure, juvenile crime, and to becoming teenage parents themselves. And saying that, it's only statistics. There's also a lot of good teenage mothers, and I'm proud to say I'm a sister of a teenage mother. But the reality is that the statistics have shown that happens. So that it is a health inequality, and it's a health inequality where the whole issue of sex education, the whole issue of people becoming pregnant in their teenage years, and then how that feeds into the continuing life of the mother, and indeed the father, and the continuing life of the baby. The other statistics have shown that teenage mothers and unplanned pregnancies can be associated with poor educational achievement, poor physical and mental health, social isolation and poverty. So I think events like today are very, very important. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we do have these high statistics, but there's also good news when the downturn in teenage parenthood or teenage mothers is reducing. So having briefly set the context around teenage birth and allowing you to do all the hard work, I'm going to introduce Maria Lohan from Queen's University, who's going to describe the development of a movie-based educational resource designed to increase young people's intention to avoid adolescent pregnancy and to increase their ability to communicate about this issue. And finally, because people have a child in teenage years, I'm hoping society doesn't write them off.
I'm very, very pleased to be here as a girl on the hill this morning, and it's lovely looking out on this wonderful stretch, and it's great to be here, and we really do appreciate the partnership approach that this seminar is advancing. I'd like to introduce my co-authors. First of all, it's Dr. Peter O'Halloran and Áine Aventin. So I'll begin by saying that the aim of our study today is what we'd like to do is to give you a brief overview of the current status of research on teenage pregnancy. Then we'd like to focus on why we think it's important to include teenage men in relation to this issue. And then we're going to show you and describe an educational approach that we have developed from our research at Queen's University in Belfast. And it's a movie-based educational approach, and we'll describe it and get a chance also to allow you to preview this approach this morning. And the final thing that we're going to do after I show you the movie is I'm going to bring you back for a few minutes just to describe the evidence behind why we're doing this approach in this way. So I hope that it'll be of use to some of you who may also be involved in policy or indeed in planning interventions around improving young people's lives. So, to move to the first issue first of all, what is the current status of research on teenage pregnancy in Northern Ireland? Well, as you're probably well aware, teenage pregnancy is not just an issue for us, it is in fact a world health problem. And teenage pregnancy and teenage birth rates are in fact used as an indicator of the health status of a country. So this information is routinely collected for all countries. And as a result, going back over the last 30 years, there's an immense amount of research and policy reports relating to the issue of teenage pregnancy. And I think that this research overall can be summarized into three main areas. If you were to divide it up, it kind of looks like this. And the first area is research which tries to measure the incidence of teenage pregnancy, just trying to measure what it is. And I'm going to offer you some of the punchlines from this research. And really, I suppose the first punchline to say is that on a worldwide basis, the US has the highest rate of teenage pregnancy in the Western world. And the UK has the highest rate of teenage pregnancies in Western Europe. And I'm just going to show you some graphs actually to show you that. So you can see that the USA is quite an outlier, but the UK is the next highest country in Western developed countries. And now Áine will just move to the statistics for Northern Ireland, which Sue has already just described. So what you see from this chart is a couple of things. First of all, you'll see that there has been a small incremental decline in teenage pregnancy rates over the last 10 years. The other thing you'll notice is that teenage pregnancy is an issue that cuts across all social classes, but as Sue pointed out, the rate is almost twice as high in areas of high social deprivation. So the green line is the one that's least deprived, and the blue line is the one in the most deprived areas, and the red shows the average of the two, which is the figure that Sue mentioned, which is 15 per 1,000 births. So it's an issue that affects all schools here in Northern Ireland. There's instances of pregnancy in right across the schools. Well, not many reported in the all-boys schools yet, but as you can see, it's an issue that affects all young people in Northern Ireland. The third point I want to make is that there is a lot of research also, which Sue has also touched on, which explores the impact of adolescent pregnancy in people's lives. And most of the research here points to the adverse social, health, and economic consequences of unintended pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, in young people's lives. So it, as Sue has pointed out, it has adverse health consequences not only for the mother, but for the baby. And of course, as our own sexual health strategy has done a health economic evaluation of this, it has enormous costs in society. But just like Sue mentioned, and I'm glad to hear her mention it because the research also acknowledges, is more willing to acknowledge, that not all teenage pregnancies are maladoptive, and that teenage pregnancy is often an opportunity also for young people to turn their lives around. And that there is more willingness in the research today to acknowledge the difference between intended and unintended pregnancies, and to acknowledge some of the benefits to young people of bringing a child into the world. However, in all of this immense research that's been done to date, there is one very conspicuous absence, and that is men. And there's very, very little research done on the role of adolescent men in terms of reducing unintended pregnancy, or their roles and perspectives on unintended pregnancy, or what they might view as their responsibilities in this regard. So my own research interest really comes from men's health, fatherhood background, and I'm interested in really exploring research which expands men's area of caring for infants. And that's really where the motivation for this study came from. So Áine will move along. So why focus on teenage men? We're going to give you some arguments for this. Well, it's not just increasingly important to me or my fellow researchers, but also to many youth workers, parents, teachers, that addressing teenage pregnancy is an important yet very neglected part of addressing teenage pregnancy. And I think one of our catch lines really on this is, about teenage men being considered half of the problem. Well, we also must consider them half of the solution. And I think there's a need for greater emphasis to look at young men in terms of how they can also contribute to reducing unintended pregnancy. And this is important too because currently we know from research that young men are much less likely to receive relationship and sexuality education, lock, stock and barrel, shall we say, right across the board. But they're particularly less likely to receive relationship and sexuality education in relation to teenage pregnancy or in relation to pregnancy issues. That's considered very much an issue we deal with in relation to young women. We house those responsibilities there. And research also shows that as parents, we often do the same thing. We often talk to our young sons, or young daughters rather, about how to protect themselves against teenage pregnancy. But parents are much less likely to have these conversations with their sons. And this is shown in research not just in Ireland and the UK, but in the US and quite broadly across the board. And so the next point really we want to make also is that research with women who've experienced a crisis pregnancy, and there's quite a lot of research with women who've experienced crisis pregnancy, and there's a very strong pattern running through this, that how a woman defines a pregnancy as a crisis pregnancy in the first instance is often based on how she thinks her partner thinks about the pregnancy. And as well, partners affect how women cope with an unintended pregnancy in the short term and long term. So what we know from this research with women is that men are very clearly in the background. But for adolescent men in particular, we feel it's important to help them understand what their responsibilities might be in influencing women, and especially to give them a better understanding of how they can take on roles and responsibilities in preventing an unintended pregnancy. As Sue has also mentioned, I think the sexual health strategy in Northern Ireland has been very important in terms of emphasising how sexual health is not just an issue about sexuality, but is a broader health and well-being issue. And so that addressing how young people can develop positive relationships is important more broadly. So our interest really here too is in addressing young men as well as young women in terms of how they can protect their bodies, delay sexual relations until it is appropriate for them, and also to help them resist peer pressure to have sex. And one of the important things that we point out in our research is that most young people, especially at around 16 years of age, are not having sex in Northern Ireland, and they need to know this. So, in general also, research shows that teenage years are a critical turning point. They're critical years of learning. And often we address young women from point of menstruation about these issues. But these are critical issues to address with young men as well, that have the potential to have an impact throughout their adult years. So now we're going to describe, we're researchers essentially, and we're going to describe our programme of research that's going back quite a number of years now in relation to this issue. So we began with a programme of work, first of all, that looked at understanding men's health. And this was important to us because we wanted to bring together research which looked at the cultures of masculinity that affect men's health and tie that in with the broader literature on inequalities in health. And this helps us understand the risk factors behind men's health behaviours and risk behaviours. And then we went on to understand the specifics of our area, and we began with a systematic review of the research that has been done already on adolescent men and pregnancy. And then I just chart this out for you, if that's okay, rather than going into the details. And then we continued by doing a large study in the Republic of Ireland on adolescents' men's attitudes and decision-making in relation to an unintended pregnancy. And this was funded by the Crisis Pregnancy Programme in the Republic of Ireland, and it was in schools in Ireland. Then we went on to do a very large qualitative study of how parents talk to their children, both adolescent and pre-adolescent children, about sex and sexuality, because we consider parents to be a key element in addressing issues of unintended pregnancy. And this brings us to where we are more or less today, where we were awarded funding by the Economic and Social Research Council to continue this work by developing an educational resource out of our research to address teenage pregnancy. But I have a little box over here to the side, because concurrently with that programme, we're doing now a study of the sexual health and education needs of young people in care who are a particularly high-risk group in relation to unintended pregnancy. So it's very important to understand their particular needs in relation to this issue. So that was our programme of work. And what we want to tell you about really today was that when we were doing our research with young men in the Republic of Ireland, we wanted to develop a methodology which would allow them to really understand the issue of teenage pregnancy and to delve into their understandings of it. And some of you may have had the experience in research so far where you're asked to respond to maybe a 3-line scenario of, you know, Mike and Sarah are out tonight and Mike has had too much to drink and so on, and then how would you respond to this scenario? Well, we took that kind of methodological approach but scaled it up to produce a 25-minute, film, an audiovisual production that Pete was very much involved in, which tells the story, or tries to bring to life the story of a scenario of an unintended pregnancy in a young man's life, so told from the perspective of a young man. And what the participants were asked to do was essentially role play being in this situation. So they were asked to decide, think about questions of how it would feel and how they would act. But I'm not going to describe it too much because I'll have an opportunity to show it to you, which will make it more real. But right from the outset, as we were doing this research, and this is why we're very glad to be here, because it was people who weren't researchers, it was teachers, end users, pupils, relationship and sexuality education experts, school principals, approached us and said, we need resources like this to raise this issue with young men. Is there any way you could work with us to develop a culturally sensitive and appropriate tool to address this issue with young men in the classrooms? And we thought, well, we'll give it a go. And so that is where we started. And we redeveloped the original research tool into an educational intervention. So the basis of it is this IVD and other accompanying educational materials, which I'll describe in a moment. But the key educational aim of this is to reduce unintended pregnancies. It's to help young people increase their intention of not getting into this situation. So it's about, in the first instance with young men, raising their awareness about this issue, really bringing the message home to young men. And it's secondly about developing some of the communication skills that they will require in their relationship to address this issue. And it's about increasing their self-efficacy in dealing with the skills required to avoid an unintended pregnancy. So our resource not only includes the interactive video drama, which we're going to show you, but a variety of teacher-based resources that they can use in the classroom, which we have developed in consultation with teachers and educational experts from a wide variety of schools. And it's to assist them to be able to develop this sensitively. It's also to assist them to develop a lesson plan which can include parents, because they're often neglected in relationship and sexuality education, and as I will show you in the research in the end, they're a crucial part in addressing this issue. We developed also a package for relationship and sexuality education teacher trainers, because they are often the people who help teachers implement these resources in the classroom. And again, to include parents, an information leaflet to inform them of the resource, and educational based materials for parents to skill them up in having these conversations with their children, which was a key part of our original research, which saw that this was a need. I should say that we really wanted to produce a resource which raised the issue of teenage pregnancy and brought up these issues, but would be flexible enough to be used in all schools in Northern Ireland and indeed in the Republic of Ireland. So we wanted to design a resource in consultation with experts and teachers, which would allow them to express their school ethos in relation to how they think it's important to avoid an unintended pregnancy. The first thing really to say is that most of the research on relationship and sexuality education acknowledges that teenage pregnancy is a very complex phenomenon, and it can only really be partially addressed by relationship and sexuality education. That it is an important component, but it is not something that's going to solve the issue overnight. But in the programs that have been developed, we've learned about what makes an RSE program more effective than others. And the first point really that we have up there is that it's important to have a theoretically based sexual health program. And really what that point really means is that it's important not just to concentrate on the outcome behaviour, but to think about all of the factors that lead up to causing that behaviour, so to address each of those, and especially in our resource to help develop the steps of awareness, communication skills and increased intention. The second issue there is about RSE resources should be developed to be targeted to meet people in their own context, and to have targeted messages that make sense to people within their own local context. And for for us, what this meant really was the importance of developing an interactive video drama with Northern Ireland actors in Northern Ireland settings, so to bring the message home to young people in Northern Ireland that this is an issue that affects them. And the next issue is about incorporating behavioural skills. And really this point is quite simply to say that RSE interventions that rely simply on providing information or simply a message aren't very effective, and the more effective ones are ones that incorporate developing behavioural skills. So for us this was about active participation it's not just a DVD, but it's an interactive DVD. All of the lesson plans that accompany the programme as well are ones that young people participate in. So they're developing stop and think strategies in relation to their relationships. The next point really is about promoting and desensitizing the issue of teenage pregnancy within mixed-sex classrooms. So classrooms, except for single-sex schools, but classrooms are generally safe places for young people to discuss the gender issues around responsibilities around a teenage pregnancy in a safe environment. And so it's important that young people get an opportunity to express those issues there and to have teacher input into the values that they want to impart around that. The next point, really, the fifth point, is to say that RSE programs that reach beyond the classroom are shown to be more effective than those that don't. And this really for us was about including parents in particular. And there is an emerging body of research that suggests that parents are very important to include in relationship and sexuality education. And so for us it's not just about giving information to parents, which we do, but also including them in the lesson plans so that young people actually have homework to go home and speak to their parents about this issue. And the final point really is about trying to engage with young people empathetically and also cognitively. So it's really about helping young people understand some of the emotional issues around this. And for us, the reason why we developed the film was about trying to help young people understand all of the emotions involved in being in such a situation. And another point, and not an insignificant point, is really because most young people said that was great fun looking at that film. And that in itself is important because disaffection from school is a key risk factor in relation to unintended pregnancy. So if we can make RSE classes more enjoyable, that perhaps is half the battle as well. So perhaps I'll leave you with that point. We're at the stage where we have been developing this. We're very keen to get feedback all the way along from a broad section of society in Northern Ireland. We're working towards making it available from 2013. But we are research scientists, I suppose, and our main interest is in understanding if what we are doing can be evidence-based. So the next stage of our research will be to roll this out on a selective basis to test in a rigorous manner whether it is both acceptable, as we hope it will be, to a broad range of schools, but also is it effective? Is it doing what we think it's doing? Is it helping young people to avoid an unintended pregnancy? And we have a variety of measures in place to try and test that issue. So that's it. Sinead, thank you very much.